Hello, everyone. If a couple of you could indicate that you can hear me, I'd appreciate it. Just in the chat line, please. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Okay, we'll proceed here. The purpose of this get together is to go over the exam, point out common mistakes. Hopefully, along the way, you'll be able to compare, if you will, what I'm talking about and showing you to the work you've done and pick up perhaps shortfalls of where you may have lost marks. The meeting's being recorded, so you can listen to this a second or a third time over if you're so inclined. I will post it. It may not be until into the evening because my afternoon until early evening is really full of uh, of activities that I must take care of. So let me begin here by just making a few comments about things we've done, things that have been done on the exam that I think cost people marks. These are just sort of scribbly notes that I put together quickly. And I normally, when I see a mistake or an event happening on the exam that is common to more than a couple of students, I make a note of it so that I can share that. And a couple of these I mentioned in the lecture this morning. So one of the first things I noticed that people were using prime formulas for their calculations when they didn't have to. The factor that they're seeking through the prime formula is readily available in tables. And I found that it normally will take you longer time. So it costs you time if that's of concern to you during the exam. And in a few instances, I found that it introduced computational mistakes that probably wouldn't have been made if you looked it up directly in the table. So I would highly recommend that where you have the option of using the tables, you do so. It saves time and it will, providing you're using the tables correctly, reduce the likelihood of um, of computational mistakes. Let me just see here. The next comment I want to make, I don't have my chat line up on this right now because I'm reading off of a document a little bit here. I'll go back to it in a minute if anyone's sending me stuff, and I'll look at it then. Some students just simply did not follow the marking guideline. So with that in mind, I want to bring something up here for you. You should now see on your screen just a blue screen coming from me. If you're not seeing that, please let me know. And what I want to do is put on that screen here, this document here. This was in Learn, and it was the reference document we used throughout all of the work we did in this course after chapter 2, I might note. So these were the key lines of work that would earn you marks. And it is laid out in this fashion. So many people didn't show one or two or even three of these lines. They just kind of wrote down stuff and just showed me the bottom line. And you got credit for that bottom line, but you did not get credit for the work that got you there. And I made that pretty clear during the year that that's what I would be looking for. So again, use the marking guideline as a general comment. I don't want to make it sound as if it was a huge problem because many people followed it rather meticulously. And of course, they got full marks for it. But when you're starting out and you're looking for some sort of cash flow analysis, I look for what I usually call the general factor statement. and then I look for that with the values filled in. Then I look for it again with the necessary factor filled in that you take from the tables. And finally, the bottom answer. So I would look for those 4 lines of work to get 4 marks for that component. If one of them is missing, then you wouldn't have got a mark for that. Whatever's there, you got a mark for. But if you missed one, and it was common for 1 line or so to miss on a regular basis for some people. If by chance the tables don't work for you, then you would have to use the prime formulas. So this area here would be very similar to here. You start out with your factor statement. Then you have to substitute in, because the tables don't work, the prime formula. Then you would place the values in the prime formula and then do your computations. So again, 4 marks allocated to this. I also should say that I am let me just see. Yep. I was just wanted to bring my chat line up here again. And I wanted to, I'm assuming you can see this document. I should have asked that earlier. I'm assuming you can. So if you cannot see this document referred to as the exam rubric or guidelines, you need to let me know, but I'm assuming everyone can see that now. In cases, some computations, and for example, the first question fell into this category, and it was a situation where we're not using factors. It may or may not need a cash flow, but you're not using it. And therefore, just simply your formula, the formula with the values plugged in, and then your bottom line. So there would be 3 marks awarded through that process for every time you had to do it. And again, that's where the marks would come from. Some people might show the second and the third line here, and they got 2 marks out of 3 for that, because I look for this as well. Also, many people filled in a concluding or a decision statement, and that's good. I have no problem with that. If it's asked for, then in that case, you would get 1 mark for it. And then going back up to the very top of this document for a complete and correct cash flow. And I noticed in the work, lots of people do not make a proper cash flow. So you need to learn how to do that so you don't lose a mark or a half a mark. In some cases, if it was minor, I just extracted off a half a mark and gave you the other half mark because you showed sufficient, or you showed good information on the cash flow. It just may not have been complete. So that is an area there. Also, if you have to calculate either a sub-period or an effective interest rate, I would award 1 mark for that as well. Sometimes you didn't have to calculate it. You just were able to use the 1 in the question directly. And if that's the case, then you would not get a mark for that. There'd be no mark awarded. And the last point I would make on this diagram here, or on this guideline document, is that you cannot use, if I indicate not to use a linear interpolation, you cannot use it. If I don't say so, if I indicate that there's no problem in using it, or I say nothing, I'm silent on it, then the use of it needs a cache or a graph associated with it in order to get full marks for that part of the work. Okay. So I just wanted to share that with you here. I'll take that down. Go back to maybe one of my other documents here. And as I mentioned, some students came up a little and sometimes a lot short on the cash flow diagram. That cost a lot of people a mark here and there, and it adds up. When you have 9 questions, and if you don't have 9 cash flow diagrams done correctly, then it could cost you up to 9 marks. So it's important. Now, these are not across the board mistakes. Lots of people did it very well and very clear and easy to follow. So they got their mark for it. A couple of mistakes I noticed along the way is people are truncating, especially the interest rate or depreciation rate, prematurely. When you do that and you still have more calculations to do, you're ignoring the full effect of interest. And when you did that, although I would probably mark it somewhat correct, you would probably lose a half mark or 1 mark because your answer really was not complete and accurate to the number of decimal places I'm looking for. And often when I look back in the question, I would see that occurring. And that would be the result of, you may have calculated, for example, an interest rate, and I'll point a couple of them out to you when we go through this, or you may have calculated appreciation rate. And in doing so, you had you would truncate after 1 decimal place, so you might have using it as a decimal number, you might have 0. I'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some people would say, well, that's the same as 0.1, and they'd ignore the balance of the numbers. Well, that's not taking full account of your interest or your depreciation rate into effect, and that would affect your ongoing calculations. Always carry more than less. The last comment I'll make before I move on into the actual exam review will be that a few people had no idea how to handle the situation of when n is equal to infinity. It does not have a finite number. It runs for an infinite time. And as a result of that, I just saw some cases just a blank page, nothing done at all. We did touch on that a little bit this morning on how to handle that for the questions we did, but we've done some before as well. So again, an important thing to pay attention to. So I'm going to close that down here. And I want to bring up here, just give me the minute, please, the actual exam. So you should now see that. Okay, for the first question here, it dealt with the situation here of straight line depreciation as well as declining balance depreciation. And in doing this, these are the numbers you need to work with. So the first part of this question would be worth 3. You would have got 1, 2, 3 here. And most people got that correct, but this is what I'm looking for. In a couple places, I noticed the first line was not there, so they get 2 out of 3 for the first part of this question. In the second part of it, and you can copy this down, or like I say, it's being recorded, so you can replay this a few times if you want to pick up on where your shortfalls may have occurred to you. But second part, I allocated 6 marks to it. 1 to calculate correctly the depreciation rate. So there'd be 1 mark here, 1 mark here, and 1 mark there. And if you don't have one of those lines, then you would not acquire that mark. Here's a situation here where quite a few people, I won't say quite a few, but a few people indicated that they calculated this out and then they said, well, I'll just call it 0.1 and go on from there. And when they did it that way, this throws your answer out by quite a bit. And as a result of that, again, I would follow through your work and award marks, providing the rest was there, but I would perhaps take a mark off because of that premature truncation that occurs. So that's how you'd approach this one here. Okay, just moving stuff around here a little bit. The next one, question or problem number 2, you could do it either way. The red represents one way, the blue represents another way. So I worked it with I subscript E for an effective interest rate. And then I also worked it for a sub-period interest rate. And again, this is the information that you have here. So because it was a compounded daily, you would get 1 mark for correctly calculating either IE or IS. You'd need also with that the corresponding N value, whether it be for, there should be a capital N there, whether it be for years, which is what you're given, or whether it would be for the number of days. Some people here figured they lost a mark or so, but what they end up doing is they calculated that there'd be something like 30 days in a month, and there were so many months, and calculated it out that way. That ended up with a wrong number for their people. Ended up with 1820, and they lost 5 days in their calculations for that. So you have to be a little careful there. And again, you have your factor statement, your formula, the formula with the numbers placed in, and then your final result. And depending upon which way you use here, there would be a difference of 3 cents. Of course, I'm not looking for that. This problem actually started out with the fact that it was purchased 5 years ago. So -5 here, 0 here. If you called this 0 and 5 here, I did not mark it wrong. I let it be. Uh, but strictly speaking, it talks here about that Zoe invested $10,000 5 years ago. So the timeline would go from -5 to 0, which still allows for N to be 5, or the corresponding number of days. It didn't affect your answer if you'd said this was 0 and this would be +5, because it's all relative, and I didn't have a problem around that. So I looked at that. I'll leave that there for a minute if you want to look at both of these. If you want to look at both of those, I'll leave them there for a minute or so before I carry on to the next pair of questions. Problem number 3 and 4 are here. Again, the first one on number 3 here, it was a problem that involved an arithmetic gradient factor. Formulas are here. Some people calculated the total annuity and felt, I guess, that was the end of the question, and they never took the annuity and determined its equivalency at 5 years into the future. So they ignored this. So they would lose 4 marks if that happened here. There would be no work showing here. In other cases, again, this is one that quite easily is done by looking the factor up in the tables and doing the very short arithmetic around that. I did put this in there in the event for my own reference more than anything. In the event some people kind of insisted on doing their own calculation for the factor, which is the correct formula to do that with. But I noticed along the way that a couple people made mistakes in calculating it. So you have the wrong factor. Kind of a shame because the correct factor is in the tables. All you had to do was use it. But some people did that. The other thing with this question here that occurred where I noticed mistakes was people uh, did not know how to draw the annuity, or they did not know or did not know how to draw the gradient. If you can follow my pointer along here, some people will draw an annuity with a vertical line straight down and then a horizontal line. The annuity is shown with a diagonal line. Doesn't have to be a perfect 45 degrees, but it basically should run from the beginning of time to the end of the annuity period. In this case, this would represent 1 year here. Then the gradient, some people showed a geometrical gradient in here. So they started out here with a line that would curve downward. In other cases, they started out here with a line that would start down and then flatten out this way. And there's a correct way to do that. So that would cost you the 1 mark if you did one of those two things on that cash flow diagram. On the next one, number 4, many people got this totally correct, no problem at all. It was only worth 4. 1 mark here for the formula, another mark here for putting the correct values in, and finally another one here for the final answer. Your 4th mark would have been the proper cash flow diagram. And I can't put fraction or I can't estimate how many people did it well, but lots and lots and lots of people did this well, and they got 4 for 4 on that. Okay, so I'll leave those two showing there for a minute if you want to copy anything down in that regard. Okay, over here now we have another one. This is a geometrical gradient. And as you know, there's no tables for this value. So what you would have to do is actually use the prime formulas. But before you get there, you have to compute a growth adjusted interest rate, having been given an interest rate and a growth rate. So you would do that and you get here. Now, again, lots of people, not lots, but quite a few people would take this number and they would round it off at 0.03 and continue working. And they are ignoring the full interest effect, growth adjusted interest rate, by doing that. So that would creep through these calculations and you end up down here with a number that is, well, just simply not correct. Now, if you did that, I tended to mark everything accordingly. However, I might take off 1 mark when all is said and done, simply because you're truncating your interest rate prematurely. Up here, lots of people had no idea, not lots, quite a few people had no idea how to draw the symbol for a geometrical gradient through here. Once again, some people had trouble. They would draw their annuity with a vertical line and then a horizontal line paralleling the timeline. That would be wrong. The necessary information is shown in here as well. Some people, even though they had the right formula, did not correctly calculate the I naught value. Arithmetic mainly is what it would be. I think one person actually forgot to subtract 1 off of this after they did this numerator divided by the denominator and then wrote that number down here, forgetting to subtract off 1, and they used that through it all. So that kind of sets it up. Now, in that case, I would go through it and try to see if you're convincing me that you know how to do it. You just messed up on that first line of work. And as a result of that, I normally would still award some marks, not a lot, but some marks, because you are showing me that you do know how to proceed. For example, here they would show this and they get 1 mark for this, even though this might be wrong. They get 1 mark for the factor statement. They'd get another mark for substituting in the correct formula, but here it would be wrong, and here, and here. Well, the lines that I'm looking for here would be 1 mark for this, 1 mark for this, 1 mark for this, and 1 mark for this. As I mentioned a number of times, whether you take 1 step to go from here to there, or whether you take 5 or 7 steps to go from here to there is your call. But I don't award marks for those intermediate calculations. Some people gave me the p value, and that was good, correct, maybe not right sometimes, but then they didn't calculate the future value. This here is looking for a value here. How much money will the company accumulate in its investment fund by the end of the 5th year? So it's looking for a future value. So you would lose 1, 2, 3, 4 on this question if you didn't put this part in here, because you're giving me the present value, not the future value. And as you may recall, hopefully you do, that when you use a geometrical gradient, it is modeled in such a way that the results you get will be a present value. but you're looking for the future value. So you have to do this conversion afterwards. This next question, number 6, was done, I think, fairly well from what I remember with everybody. And what I can indicate here is that, again, there is an alternate way some people define the annuity, knowing the future value here. Other people just worked it backwards. They used this formula, and that's fine. But the unknowns on the right-hand side, and they would then flip it over later and got the right answer. I have no problem with that approach. So either um, factor statements will suffice in cases like this. Doesn't matter to me. Um, I have to think my way through it to see just what you're doing here. But yeah, that usually worked out. And again, a pretty simple cash flow diagram, and that's what I showed here. So I'll leave this up here just for a minute or so you have a chance to copy it down. So your 7th and 8th problems are here. Again, the cash flow diagram, but you're solving for n in this case. You cannot use linear interpolation in your solution. A couple people did that, and you would get nothing for that work. You might get something for the correct value here, or the correct factor statement with the formula, because if that's how you went, because you can't use the n value, you need this formula. In this case, there is no n value as a finite number. So you still might get one here, another mark here, and you might work your way down in these calculations, but then you would use linear interpolation, and I indicated you could not do that. So you would lose marks for this part of the work if you're using linear interpolation. I also, in a question like this, because this was more than the normal type of arithmetic that's involved, I awarded 2 marks for correctly calculating it down to here. So I kind of gave a mark, 1 mark here, 2 marks, 3 marks, and you have to go through all of this to get to your 4th mark. And in doing that, I awarded an extra mark if you were on the right track when you got down halfway through it here. Some people, not all, but a few people had some difficulties on how to determine the log values. In this case, the natural log is what I use, but you could use log base 10. It's immaterial to me. You can, as long as you're doing it the same thing to both sides of the equation, you'll be fine. But I use natural logs because that's what they advance in the textbook. Over here, pretty straightforward, but again, oh, I should say this here. Again, the red is what you're one way of doing it, but some people flipped it over and solved it with A is equal to this. And you can do the same thing. It's just, I think the one extra line of work that usually goes in because of that, because what you're looking for is anyway, you can do this way here and you end up with the same number. Doesn't matter both ways, but you need to do one or the other. And some people probably, I'm just going to throw it out there at 50-50. Probably some people did it P is equal to A, da 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 da. Other people did it A is equal to P, da 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 da. And it's immaterial to me. Either way provides a very great answer. So no problem at all that way, as long as your arithmetic is correct. And the numbers are a little different as you're working your way through it, but nothing significant that I'm sure can't be handled. In other words, this is like the inverse of this work over here. Over here, pretty straightforward. This was a depreciation problem using a declining balance, but it was n you were seeking in this case. And in doing that, you could handle it this way here. solve for n from this formula here, because you have it all. Your book value is here, which is what's left over. Your book value here, your initial price is 30 here, and the 1 minus D is given in the question up here, 25%. So you just solve for n, and that's what you had to work on through here. Alternatively, some people handled it through this approach, and I had no problem with that either. It works just as well. So again, 5 years works out. So you can use either A or B. I had, or red or blue. And there, if there was another way that came up that that worked, I marked it accordingly, and you'd get full values. I don't always have the time or the space or the desire to go looking for alternate ways to solve some of the problems that are not usually seen. But if you did it that way, if you did it by an alternate way, not red, not blue, but another color, then okay, I would mark it correctly. And the last question was here. Pretty straightforward, I think. However, it was 10 years ago. So this would be minus 10. This would be 0. Didn't matter. Some people put this at 0 and this at 10. But you had to keep in mind you were looking for a future value. Sorry, a present value, knowing a future value. So you can calculate IE and solve it this way, or you can calculate IS and solve it this way. Some people made mistakes in converting N into days. You had 10, and for some reason, the arithmetic of multiplying by 365 by 10 did not go well, and some people ended up with a number here that was incorrect. But if that's how you want it to go, then, and many people did it and did it correctly, so it's not as if it was a disaster for everybody, but I'm just pointing out some of the things I remember. And that's it. Now I can go back to any one question if you want to put it into the chat line. If you want to put it into the chat line, and I will, as a result of that, I will roll it back to that question if you want to take another look at it vis-a-vis your work. But that's what I have. It's not my plan to circulate the papers, because I would have to scan each one of them. And when I do it for one group, I have to do it for all groups. And I'd have to scan about 210 papers overall, and then email them to the individuals. So it's not my practice with this distance learning to be able to forward it back when I have to deal with 210 different papers. So they're not all engineering economics. Some of them can be probability and statistics. Others can be legal surveys. But it's not my practice to do that. And just give me a minute here. Person's asking for number 4. So there it is. What I can do, if you send me an email and ask me what you got per mark, or sorry, per question, because I tabulate this in a spreadsheet and I actually do it twice as a check to make sure I entered things correctly. And I can cut out the line that belongs to you and drop that line into the return email. But in order to cut down on the effort that I have to put into it, if you email me and just simply say, kind of please forward your grades per question, I can cut that line out of my spreadsheet quite easily, drop it into an email, return it to you, and that's all the work I have to do. That's pretty easy, and that'll tell you what you got, and then you can go back through this recorded meeting, and for questions where you might have got 1 out of 9, you might know then that, yeah, I got to look at that question with a little more severe, a little more intensity. So I will do that if you like. Yeah, this would be an error here, so that's my mistake. I appreciate that, who's making that. It's privately, so I won't mention it. The right number was used in the calculations, 5%, 5%. So strictly speaking, and I'll correct it right here while you're here, 5% is what I should have read. So I appreciate knowing that. That was sent privately to me as well. Okay. So that is what I have in this regard. As I mentioned, if you would like to send me an email, it won't be this afternoon. I'm just totally booked till about 6:30, 7 o'clock tonight with things I must take care of. But and then I have to prepare for my lecture in the morning in probability and statistics. But over the next day or three, if you ask for your marks per question, that's fairly easy for me to do. But if I just don't have, and I don't think it's very easy to do if I have to scan each of these papers and send them back to all of my students that I'm now dealing with at this time. Okay, nothing's coming in, so I'm going to take the share screen down. Nobody's saying anything on that. So we're not sharing anymore. And if there's still quite a few of you present here, so if you like, still have 21 of you here, 20 now. So if you want to hang in here and you have specific questions, I can try to handle that with you. But otherwise, I have a commitment for 3 o'clock that I must attend to. Yeah, the plan for the next 2 weeks sent to me privately. The plan will be you'll have a quiz next week on chapter 5. You are now working on chapter 5. Maybe some of you already have. I will go over some questions related to question 5. And when I do that, I draw out the relevant information. I point to it in the textbook as to what's applicable to that question. So we'll probably do, time permitting, of course, we'll probably do 7 or 8 questions next Monday on that. And then the following Monday will be your exam. I'm tentatively setting that up for 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but that's probably when it will be. I haven't ruled out a morning exam, but my preference would be 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's what we'll have. So that'll answer that question. For the plan. No, we don't have the time as it worked out, and that worked out that way as well. It just seems that it takes longer to do this online than it did in the classroom. In the classroom, we're able to complete not all, but most of Chapter 7. So Chapter 7 deals with the replacement theory. When a piece of equipment gets so old, there's a way of calculating when is the optimum time to replace it from a financial perspective. Because as you know, with chapter, when you have a piece of asset, as its life continues, its value, its book value declines. It has less and less value with the use of time. You could associate that to having a car. You buy it today for 30,000, and a year from now, it's probably worth 24,000, and then 20,000 a year after that, and so on. So it drops off. But on the other hand, as time goes on, your maintenance and operating costs will go up. So because of that, there's an optimum time in which you would replace, if you will, a piece of equipment where it doesn't make a lot of sense to keep it longer because it's costing you more than it's worth. When is that time? And that's what Chapter 7 deals with. I do tend to I do tend to um, look at it to some degree, but never yet has there been enough time to complete the chapter, but I do attempt to do what I can in chapter 7 with the online work this year. And the same thing happened to me uh, with the group I handled from end of October to the end of January. I was not really able to put any to complete it, virtually any of the work in chapter 7. So we're not going to do it either. It just, I need another week in order to do that, and we just don't have it. Um, no, I would prefer this came in privately, but I'll mention it this way. I want you to email it because then I can just say return and get it. I have the email all set up to go back to you. And therefore, all I have to do is hit return, drop in your line of marks, and then you have it. So that's how I would like to approach that, rather than ask me here and then I have to locate your email address and set it up that way. It just takes me more time, and quite frankly, that's what it's about for me right now is um, is budgeting my time. Yep, you're welcome. I won't use your name, but you're welcome on that comment coming back from your question. Okay, there's only 3 of you left, so I assume we're done here. Now only 1 of you left, so I will stop recording, and I will, when it comes back to me, it'll probably have to be this evening, but I will put it up on Learn for you to view.